A modern Boeing 777. Clear skies, perfect visibility, fully functioning systems. And just minutes later, it explodes at the edge of San Francisco's runway. Not because of the weather, not due to technical failure, but something far more dangerous. Deadly silence inside the cockpit. 3 people died. Hundreds were injured. But the most violent impact didn't happen on the ground. It hit the mindset of modern aviation. This is the story of how a plane crashed, not because it lacked technology, but because of blind faith in it. And because people forgot how to command the sky. This wasn't just an accident. This was an indictment of a system lulled to sleep by automation. The problem wasn't in the sky, it was in the cockpit. On a perfect day for landing clear skies, full visibility. San Francisco Airport wide open, a Boeing 777 dove into tragedy. There was no storm, no mechanical failure. This crash began the moment the aircraft appeared to be flying normally. The problem wasn't outside. It was inside the minds of those flying it. When they believed silence meant safety, when they assumed technology would mask their weaknesses, disaster had already begun its countdown. 307 people on board believed everything was under control. None of them knew the pilot had never manually landed this aircraft type. No one knew he was trying for the first time at one of America's most complex airports without landing guidance. That wasn't a mishap. That was an authorized risk. A silent gamble normalized by protocol. No alarms, no blinking lights, just a chain of errors hidden beneath calm procedures. The issue wasn't the 43 flight hours. It was the system that allowed a minimally experienced pilot to take the controls under non-standard conditions. In a cockpit with no challengers, where status trumps safety, disaster is not a matter of if, but when. Planes don't crash due to storms. They crash when silence is glorified over questioning. Good weather can be the deadliest trap. The glide slope was down for maintenance, but skies were clear, so a visual landing was cleared. It sounded reasonable. But the truth was, the pilot had never executed a visual approach at this airport with this aircraft. He would now guess the descent path by eye. A skill that, if undertrained, becomes a weapon. Tragedy doesn't estimate, it executes precisely. And the moment they relied on estimation, they forfeited that precision. With the glide slope out, pilots must descend manually. For the experienced, that's routine. But the man flying lacked real-world familiarity. He'd only practiced in idealized simulators, where nothing goes wrong. In today's aviation, pilots are over-reliant on automation. When the system fails, the human mind falters. The tragedy wasn't the lack of tools, it was the absence of people who remembered how to fly without them. This crash teaches us one thing: technology can never replace awareness. It's a tool, not a crutch. When everything works, it makes pilots lazy. When it doesn't, it exposes their decay. The accident wasn't because the glide slope failed. It was because nobody saw that as a real problem. Hierarchy in the cockpit is an invisible killer. The pilot was uneasy, but didn't say a word. He feared judgment. He believed silence was professionalism. But professionalism isn't silence when lives are on the line. That silence became the reason no one challenged him. They all sensed something was wrong, but no one dared speak. When everyone waits for someone else to act, no one does. A cockpit must be built on dialogue, not deference. In this flight, 4 trained professionals were present, yet no one intervened when the descent unraveled. But because they were trained to respect the chain of command, it's a fatal mindset. When hundreds of lives depend on a few, every person in the loop must feel empowered to step in. Courtesy has no place in a nosedive. Not everyone has the same experience. Not everyone is the best pilot. But everyone in the cockpit must speak up when something is off. A good pilot isn't the one who flies best, but the one who says this isn't right. No one said that here, and so no one stopped the inevitable. This crash didn't stem from turbulence, it stemmed from reverence. A reverence that kills silently. When people stop thinking automation turns deadly, the autopilot remained in flight level change mode. In this mode, reducing speed raises the nose instead of decreasing altitude. A basic mistake. During landing, the aircraft must descend, but the system was trying to maintain altitude. The plane floated dangerously high on the glide path, and no one noticed, because they believed the system would take care of it. Blind trust in automation turned a flight into a ticking bomb. The auto throttle designed to manage engine thrust was set to hold mode, which disables speed adjustments. But no one manually adjusted the throttles. No one verified the setting. No one checked if the system was even still engaged. They simply sat there, assuming. In aviation, assumption is a killer. One misused mode, one unchecked setting, and the entire cockpit sank into a false sense of security. Planes don't crash because automation fails. They crash because people assume automation will always succeed. Technology is a tool, not a shield. When it doesn't act as expected, it's the human's job to act. But here, no one did, because everyone believed someone or something else was handling it. And that's how a jetliner became a 300-ton paperweight. Losing control is one thing, failing to realize it is worse. As the aircraft deviated from the correct glide path, no one in the cockpit realized. They didn't check PAPI lights, didn't cross-verify altitude, didn't monitor position versus plan. Instead, they assumed within limits. Small deviations in altitude, speed, and angle added up to catastrophic misalignment. And when no one realized the drift, the aircraft continued toward disaster undetected. When things got unstable, they should have deployed gear earlier, added flaps, or used speed brakes. But those actions were delayed or skipped. Why? Because they thought there was time. In aviation, later is a myth. Every second counts. 10 seconds too late deploying flaps can be the difference between a safe landing and a shattered fuselage. Every reaction came late. And in aviation, late means never. The real failure wasn't misreading gauges. It was believing they had more time to fix it. They didn't know their vertical profile anymore. They weren't flying, they were descending in denial. When your altitude, speed, and descent path all drift out of sync, you're no longer flying a plane, you're riding a steel ghost into the ground. Silence when action is needed is a crime. At 500 feet, aviation's critical go-no-go altitude, no one said a word. No one called go around. Despite all indications, misaligned altitude, unstable speed, improper flap settings, and PAPI showing full red. But they pushed on. Why? Because they believed they could still salvage it. But those last few seconds were all they had, and they wasted them watching. Go around isn't failure, it's safety. But in some cockpits, it's treated as shame. Pilots fear being seen as weak or inexperienced, and so they push through unstable approaches to avoid embarrassment. On this flight, ego won. It overruled safety. And people died because nobody wanted to appear incapable. In aviation, pride is more dangerous than turbulence. The 500-foot rule isn't a suggestion, it's a commandment. If things aren't stable, go around. If you're unsure, go around. But they didn't. Not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. The worst decisions aren't made out of ignorance, but out of misplaced confidence. This plane didn't fall because of failure. It fell because its pilots didn't know how to admit failure. A series of tiny mistakes can lead to massive death. When the pilot disconnected the autopilot, he unintentionally disengaged autothrottle too. From that point, engine thrust no longer adjusted automatically. No one noticed. No one verified speed control. They assumed it was fine. Meanwhile, the plane bled speed rapidly. While focused on glide path, they lost track of velocity. By the time they realized it was almost touchdown, the stick shaker triggered indicating stall at barely 30 feet above ground. Engines were pushed to full power, but it was too late. At 103 knots, the aircraft lacked lift. Pulling up only worsened the stall. No altitude remained to recover. This wasn't a crash due to failure. It was a crash due to mistimed human reaction. One innocent action disconnecting automation turned lethal. No alert. No correction. Just a cockpit of people unaware of what had changed. That's the essence of human error in modern flight, when knowledge exists, but awareness disappears. In aviation, disasters don't erupt from one huge blunder. They emerge from 10 small ones, and they add up faster than anyone realizes. The plane exploded, but misplaced trust was deadlier. At 11:27 a.m., the tail struck the seawall. The rear tore open. Passengers were ejected. The fuselage spun and skidded violently across the runway before stopping in the grass. Fire simmered. Panic erupted. But what shocked experts wasn't the crash scene. It was the conditions clear skies modern aircraft experienced crew. Yet the outcome was still catastrophe. 3 died, 180+ injured. 304 survived a miracle, but a deceptive one. This wasn't an unavoidable act of fate. It was entirely preventable. If just one action had been taken sooner, if one voice had spoken up, if one flap had been extended in time. But nothing came. And so people burned not from bad weather, but from bad decisions. None of the crew lost consciousness. No hardware failed. But the flight still went down. The truth, it wasn't a lack of tools, it was an excess of faith in them. Automation turned off their instincts. And when the system deviated, no one knew what to do. The explosion happened on the runway, but the first detonation was in their minds. Modern training creates pilots who can't actually fly. Post-crash investigations revealed something chilling. The pilot had never practiced a visual manual landing at this airport. In this aircraft. Most training today happens in simulators under perfect conditions. But real life isn't perfect. When glide slope was down, they needed instinct, not protocol. And no one in that cockpit had ever flown without the system's crutch. Automation isn't evil, but it's lethal when misunderstood. Had they trained for failure, they would have known flight level change isn't ideal for descent. They would have double-checked thrust modes. They'd have reacted to stick shaker immediately. But they didn't. Not because they were dumb, but because they had never been denied their digital lifelines. When systems vanished, they vanished too. Asiana 214 is a global wake-up call. Not just for Korea, for everyone. We're building a generation of pilots who manage cockpits but can't truly fly. They know checklists. They know CRM. But when it's time to grab the yoke and make a split-second save, they freeze. This is a failure not of people, but of training philosophies. This crash didn't end on the runway. It warns an entire generation. Asiana 214 didn't just kill 3 people. It destroyed the illusion that modern planes don't crash. It shattered the myth that technology will always save us. It exposed the harsh truth machines are tools, humans still bear the weight. If pilots don't question, if crews don't challenge, if respect outweighs safety, then a clear sky becomes a death trap. Aviation needs reform. Real manual flying. Real failure simulation. Real cockpit transparency. Pilots must be allowed to mess up in simulators so they don't mess up in real life. Cockpit hierarchy must end. And above all, we must ingrain one principle: silence kills. Technical failure isn't the enemy. Complacency is. Asiana 214 reflects an industry lulled by its own success. We have better planes, but do we have better pilots? We have more alerts, but do we react faster? The question isn't, could it happen again? It's what have we done to stop it? If our answer is still, let the system handle it, then we've learned nothing, and the next lesson will be bloodier. Asiana 214 didn't just fall from the sky, it fell from the illusion that technology is invincible. In the moment its tail slammed into the seawall, the entire aviation industry was jolted awake from its dream of absolute safety. This crash wasn't born of storms, but of silence, hesitation, and blind trust in systems. It's a blaring alarm. Pilots must be retrained to fly, not just to monitor. And if we keep flying with hands off the yoke, eyes locked on screens, forgetting to look out at the sky, then the next crash is not a question of if, but when.